She learned to be self-sufficient. And now her loneliness is frightening, not in her eyes, but in the eyes of a world that feeds on female fragility, a world that fears, judges, and rejects the woman who no longer bends, the woman who no longer needs anyone. Rumi wrote, "You were born with wings. Why do you still crawl through life?" She stopped crawling. She stopped waiting to be chosen. She stopped begging to be seen. Today, she doesn't cling. She doesn't annul. She doesn't reduce herself. And because of that, she disturbs. The woman who has healed herself, who has reconnected with her soul, who has transformed her pain into wisdom, has become dangerous. Not because she hurts, but because she no longer gets hurt by anything. She no longer depends on other people's validation to exist. She no longer chases emotional crumbs. She knows what love is, and she knows that love cannot be begged for. She knows what presence is, and is no longer content with disguised absences. She knows what it's like to lose herself to someone, and she chose to never leave herself again. This woman was called cold, proud, difficult, but in reality, she only protected herself. She just learned that peace is worth more than attention, that silence sometimes is the only place where the soul feels safe. Maybe you are that woman, or maybe it is becoming. Maybe you're at that point where you can no longer fit into the places you once begged to be. Perhaps you are realizing that the more you find yourself, the more others lose themselves to you. Perhaps you are discovering that emotional independence comes at a price, and the price is misunderstanding. Yes, because the woman who no longer needs one is a mirror, and not everyone is ready to look at themselves. It reflects what many avoid seeing in themselves: emptiness, lack, the illusion of control. She no longer accepts promises. She wants presence. She doesn't sell herself for company. She chooses who stays. She no longer fills other people's voids because she spent too much time trying to fill her own. Rumi said, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." She bled, in silence, in secret, and the light came in, and it illuminated not only their pain but also their decisions. Today she walks alone, but she is not alone. It's with her, with your intuition, your spirituality, your peace, and that scares me. It scares those who wanted to save it, control it, shape it. It scares her because she no longer needs saving. She became shelter. Have you noticed this? How the crying woman is welcomed, but what grows stronger is left aside. How the woman who asks for love is loved, but what is loved too much is feared. The world still doesn't know how to deal with women who are no longer dependent. And maybe no one has told you what happens when you become that woman. But now, I'll show you. Because nobody talks about it. No one prepares you for the loneliness that comes with freedom. For the silence that accompanies the woman who no longer cancels herself. For the crooked looks, the sharp words, the attempts to make you doubt your own strength. But that's why this video exists. To reveal, to remember, to make you see yourself through the eyes of your soul, and not through the eyes of those who don't know how to see you. Comment below, "I am that woman who no longer needs but still feels." These words are not just a comment. They are a statement, affirmation, spiritual positioning. Because when you write what you feel, something inside you starts to reorganize itself. And if this video has touched any part of your truth, if any sentence resonated as if it had been written for you, so leave your like now. No, because it is an automatic gesture, but because it is a sign that you have recognized something sacred in yourself. And if you feel you need to walk further down this path of silent healing, of inner awakening, of self-love that doesn't shout but transforms, then subscribe to the channel here. This journey doesn't end with this video. She's just begun. Have you ever felt like the stronger you become, the more people pull away? As if your inner growth created an invisible wall between you and the world around you? It's as if, when you cried inside, people reached out. When you gave in, even silently, you were considered kind, sweet, approachable. But now that you've learned to say no, that you've wisely raised your boundaries, that you've stopped begging for affection, it feels like you've become undesirable. This is the invisible pain of the woman who rebuilt herself. The pain no one talks about. The pain of being seen as a threat when, inside, all she carries is lightness achieved with great weight. There is a strange logic in the emotional world. It applauds the wounded woman but rejects the healed one. The wound moves. The healing is uncomfortable. It's as if the brilliance you achieved by freeing yourself from emotional dependencies has become too strong for those still living in the shadows. As if your firm voice, the same one that once cried out for love and now echoes freedom, was a sound too loud for ears accustomed to lament. The woman who becomes stronger begins to notice a subtle distancing. The messages dwindle. The invitations cease. The compliments disappear. And in place of all this, there are sidelong glances, disguised insinuations, words that try to put you back in that place where you fit perfectly. Small, submissive, available, moldable. But now you are different. And that, for many, is unforgivable, because deep down, there's an invisible programming that still inhabits the collective psyche. A good woman is one who needs. A desirable woman is one who gives herself unconditionally. A lovable woman is one who sacrifices herself. When you break this cycle, not out of rebellion but out of self-love, you become seen as a problem. But you're not the problem. The problem is that the world is not used to a whole woman. A woman who doesn't define herself by relationships, who doesn't measure her self-worth by the needs of others, who no longer sacrifices herself to keep someone close. Now, you are no longer the one running after. You are the one who decides whether it is worth opening the door. And when the door doesn't open to everyone, many are offended. They don't understand that to reach you today, physical presence isn't enough. It takes emotional presence. It takes awareness. It takes truth. The woman who doesn't need anyone bears the price of being misunderstood. She is seen as arrogant, when in reality she is just tired of begging. She is seen as insensitive, when she has learned not to drown in other people's drama. She is seen as cold, when in fact she has learned to take care of her fire without getting burned. And the hardest part of all this post-cure rejection, doesn't just come from outside. She starts to grow inside. You start to wonder, have I gone too far? Is this force pushing me away from people? Is loving myself condemning me to loneliness? But the loneliness of the awakened woman is not absence. It's discernment. She knows she can't go back. She has already tasted inner freedom. And now any relationship that brings emotional imprisonment tastes bitter. Still, she misses it. She misses being understood. You miss someone who sees the depth of your silences. You miss talking without having to translate your soul. She misses an affection that isn't an attempt to tame her, but to welcome her. Because a woman who is self-sufficient also loves. But she doesn't accept just any love. She wants love that adds value, that respects, that recognizes her light without trying to extinguish it. And for now, while that love has yet to arrive, she finds herself with the sacred pain of being misunderstood, a pain that doesn't scream, but weighs heavily, a pain that doesn't paralyze but tires, a pain that no one sees and perhaps can't even name. But it's real. It's this pain that visits the nights when she seems too strong for the world and too fragile inside. It is this pain that appears when she observes those who have walked away and realizes that she could no longer pretend to keep them. It is this pain that sets in when she discovers that sometimes her greatest strength is also her greatest loneliness. And yet, she continues, you keep choosing truth over acceptance. Continue choosing the silence of the soul over the noise of shallow relationships. Keep following, because there is something inside her that is already understood. There is no going back for those who have discovered themselves. But if you've ever felt this silent pain, this invisible rejection that comes after your healing, comment below, now that I have found myself, I have lost those who never saw me. Your words matter. Because maybe on the other side there's another woman feeling the same way, and needing to know she's not alone. The truth is, when you stop begging for love, you threaten those who still live in emptiness. Your presence becomes a mirror. Your light reveals shadows that many would prefer to keep hidden. Your silence, now full and meaningful, becomes deafening to those who only know how to live in the noise of need. And so the woman who no longer needs, who no longer drags herself to be accepted, who no longer bends to be chosen, becomes seen as a problem, not because there's anything wrong with her, but because she unintentionally exposes everything others haven't yet managed to heal within themselves. Rumi said, "Be like a tree, remain silent, but let each root tell its story." And that's what you do. Your silent presence tells a profound story, a story of rebirth, of sacred solitude, of conscious detachment, and no one can hear this story without feeling something stir inside. The woman who has been reborn, who has escaped the cycle of repeated pain, who has broken the pattern of emotional dependence, no longer needs to prove anything to anyone. She lives from her own soul, and that destabilizes, because most people still seek love to complete themselves. They still give their hearts, hoping someone else will save them. They still carry the fear of being alone as if it were a sentence of eternal emptiness, but not you. You learned that being alone doesn't mean being empty. On the contrary, it was in your solitude that fulfillment began to emerge. You no longer beg for attention. You no longer form bonds out of desperation. You no longer mold yourself to fit anyone's expectations, because you understand, deep down, that any love that demands self-abandonment isn't love. It's prison in disguise. And when a woman understands this, when she lives this truth with her body, with her heart, and with her soul, she becomes such a different energetic field that many people simply don't know how to approach it. Some feel fascination, others fear. Some try to connect, others sabotage the bond before it even forms. Some want to get closer, but they realize they can't offer anything beyond what you already offer. And so, they leave. But you're not difficult. You're deep. You're not unapproachable. You've just become selective. You are not isolated, you are rooted in yourself. And that changes everything. Because now you no longer waste yourself trying to save those who haven't yet decided to find themselves. You no longer waste energy trying to convince anyone to stay. You've learned that true connections don't require effort to exist. They flow, they respect, they sustain. And those who still live in the illusion of neediness cannot sustain this. Because around you they no longer have anywhere to hide. Your self-love unmasks false love. Your inner peace reveals the restlessness of others. Your silence highlights the noise they still carry inside. You don't need to raise your voice. No need to explain yourself. No need to justify your evolution. You simply and this being in itself is already a revolution. Because deep down, we are all connected. And when a woman awakens, when a woman heals her roots, she sends invisible waves out into the world. She shows without saying anything that it is possible to be free, that it is possible to love without sacrificing oneself, that it is possible to choose oneself without guilt. But that takes courage, because every woman who awakens needs to go through the pain of leaving behind those who are still asleep. You're no longer on the frequency of emotional begging. You no longer vibrate with emotional scarcity. You no longer accept halves disguised as wholes. And because of that, some will call you insensitive, prideful, lonely. But only you know what had to die inside you so that this new version could be born. You had to let go of loves that you loved but that hurt you. You needed to let go of promises that deceived you but didn't honor you. You had to let go of old, familiar, intense bonds, but which no longer resonated with your truth. All of this came at a cost, but you paid, because the freedom of the soul is worth more than any empty company. And yet, there are days when you miss it. Not the people, perhaps, but the old illusion that loving was enough to be loved in return. You miss the lightness you thought existed before you saw what you really were. You miss not having to explain yourself, not having to justify yourself for being too strong, too sensitive, too deep. Have you ever noticed how the world welcomes the wounded woman but fears the healed woman? How come everyone reaches out when you fall, but walks away when you get up? It's because your strength no longer fuels the game. Your presence can no longer be manipulated. And that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. But your soul knows. It knows this discomfort isn't about you. It's about them. It's a reflection of an emotional system that still relies on control to feel safe. And you don't fit in that anymore. You are the woman who is self-sufficient, who loves with presence but not with need, who offers affection but doesn't lose herself to please, who welcomes but doesn't abandon herself in the process. And so, now, you walk quieter paths, because not everyone is prepared to walk alongside someone who is no longer content with less. If you feel this truth vibrating within you, if this spiritual root that sustains you has already begun to deepen, comment below. My soul no longer begs. It chooses. These words have power, not just for the reader, but for the one who feels them. And maybe by writing them, you'll help another woman remember her own strength too. What no one told you is that the more you heal, the less you fit in where you used to cry. And that at first is scary, because you thought healing would bring peace, and it did. But it also brought silence, it brought distance. It brought a new awareness that no longer fits in old spaces. Before, you gave yourself completely and still received half. Before, you accepted crumbs and still expressed gratitude. Before, you called love what was actually just disguised attachment, camouflaged fear, accumulated need. And when you began to heal this within yourself, when your soul finally began to free itself, everything around you also began to move away. And why does this happen? Because spiritually, your frequency has shifted, and everything that was vibrating in your pain now no longer connects with your healing. It's as if you're on a new wavelength, and only what is truly true and profound can remain. You begin to realize that your emotional independence is not coldness, it is flowering. It is like a tree that after many winters finally blossoms, and in this blossoming it doesn't need an audience, it doesn't need approval, it doesn't need anyone to tell it it's beautiful. It simply blossoms, because it's in its nature to blossom, and anyone nearby, if they're sensitive, will perceive the beauty. They will respect the process. They will sit in the shade and honor the path of that root. But not everyone knows how to do this. Some will try to cut off your branches. Others will want to pick their flowers early, and still others will simply turn their backs because they can't deal with something that grows without depending on them. The hidden key is this: true healing doesn't bring you closer to everyone. It only brings you closer to what is real, and what isn't falls away. You're not being punished. You're being purged. You are not alone. You are being prepared. Your soul is not empty. It is in retreat. Because there is a very ancient force within you that is awakening. A force that doesn't shout, that doesn't flaunt itself, that doesn't need to prove anything, but that knows, that feels, that recognizes what it deserves and what it no longer accepts. And this force, when awakened, changes everything. It changes the way you look in the mirror. It changes what you tolerate in a relationship. Change what you allow into a conversation. It changes how you position yourself in the world. You stop asking for permission, you stop seeking validation, you silence the cry that once begged, "Love me, see me, choose me." And instead you walk with a light soul, even if your feet still bear scars. Because now you know. You know that your loneliness is not absence, it's freedom. It is sacred space, it's home. It is the return of your soul within yourself. After so many years exiled in stories that did not belong to you, in promises that were not fulfilled, in expectations that you no longer needed to carry, you began to remember who you were before you were taught to diminish yourself. And when that memory returns, when that spiritual identity is reborn, there's no going back, because you no longer want to fit in. You want to be whole, even if it costs you the company of someone who only knew how to deal with you when you were gone. You want a love that doesn't break you. You want a presence that doesn't suffocate you. You want a connection that doesn't require you to pretend to be okay when you're falling apart inside. And until that love arrives, if it arrives, you are enough. You regenerate in silence. You take shelter in the dark. You grow stronger in solitude. And you dance with your own soul on days when the world seems too far away to reach you, because you understood what no one explained to you. Not all emptiness is lack. Sometimes it's space. Space for the new, for the true, for what resonates with your essence, not your lack. And in that space, everything that is not love dissolves, not out of arrogance, but out of spiritual maturity, not out of pride, but out of self-respect, not out of coldness, but out of discernment. You know you weren't born to live begging for affection. You were born to live in communion with the sacred within you. And now, this sacred has returned. Open work, firm, luminous. That's why many don't recognize you anymore. Because the woman who once cried in search of love now smiles at peace with herself. And that changes everything. If you feel this hidden key revealing itself in your own story, if you recognize this turning point where silence became a temple and solitude became freedom, write below in the comments, "My soul has returned home." Maybe this sentence reminds you of something you didn't know you'd lost. And maybe by writing it, you're opening the door for other women to find their way back. Maybe you loved someone who ignored you, someone who only showed up when they felt your absence threatened, but who was never truly present when you needed them most. Maybe you gave yourself completely to someone who only offered you parts. And yet, you waited. You waited for messages that never came, for gestures that never arrived, for a change that deep down you knew wouldn't come. But you kept believing because back then, you still mistook persistence for love. You gave yourself. You molded yourself. You kept quiet to avoid conflict. You diminished yourself to fit in. And every time you felt ignored, you did more. More effort. More concessions. More silence. As if the blame for the distance were yours. As if the other person's coldness were a reflection of your neediness. As if the lack of affection were justifiable, as long as you tried a little harder. But then, something in you started to change. Not overnight, but little by little. Over time. With accumulated fatigue. With swallowed tears. With nights when the other person's absence was so great that you began for the first time to try to fill yourself. You stopped insisting. You stopped explaining. You stopped trying to fix what was never your responsibility. And then came silence. But this time, not the silence of waiting, but the silence of decision. You realized it wasn't you who was begging too much. It was he who was offering too little. You understand that love shouldn't be pulled by the hair. It should come, sit beside you, look into your eyes and stay, without you having to twist and turn for it to happen. And when that awareness took hold of you, something broke, so that something bigger could be reorganized. From the outside, many said you became different, that you became distant, that you withdrew, that you became difficult. But what no one understood is that you didn't become someone else. You simply returned to who you always were, before the wounds, before the adjustments. Before you lost yourself trying to be enough for someone who never saw your depth. The truth is that his wound has gone silent. And when she fell silent, her inner voice began to speak louder. That voice that said, you don't need to bow down anymore. You don't need to insist anymore. You no longer have to accept emotional crumbs as if they were banquets. You got up, not with anger, not with pride, but with lucidity, because there came a point where continuing to try hurt more than leaving. And then one day, that person who was ignoring you started to notice your absence, not because you were playing, but because for the first time, you were no longer there. Not in body, not in soul, not in energy. And that's when he said, you've changed. But what he didn't understand is that you haven't changed. It was just the pain that silenced. It was self-love that finally awakened. You became whole. And that, for those who benefited from your fragility, is almost an insult. Because now you are no longer predictable. You no longer answer the call of drama. You no longer react to the other person's silence with despair. You learned to listen to yours. And your silence today is not empty. It is protection. It's discernment. It's the place where you embrace yourself without fear, because you know you no longer need to be validated by anyone. Maybe you are experiencing exactly this right now. Maybe there is someone who always treated you as a second option, and now they are trying to reappear confused by your peace. Maybe someone who said you were too intense, today misses the intensity they lost. Perhaps someone who used to mock your sensitivity now wonders why you are no longer moved by them. And the answer is there in your eyes. You're not cold. You are free. And freedom, for those who only know relationships based on necessity, is incomprehensible. Before you begged for affection, now you recognize that affection isn't asked for, it's felt, it's given, it's shared. Before you begged to be chosen, now you understand that you don't need to be chosen by those who don't have the ability to see your light. Before you expected, now you walk, with firm steps, with the soul in silence, with a heart full of scars, but beating with truth. And if by chance you still carry some doubt within you, if you still feel that subtle pang of having walked away from someone who once meant so much, know this: you didn't make a mistake by protecting yourself. You didn't lose by walking away. You saved yourself. And in this process of saving yourself, you made room for something bigger to come in. Something that will not require effort, fear, or pain. Something that doesn't need to be conquered, because it comes from your essence. And when it comes, and it will, you will recognize it, because it will be light, it will be true, it will be reciprocal, and most importantly, it will be worthy of the woman you have become. If you feel that this story, in some way, is a reflection of what you have lived, are living, or are learning to overcome, write here in the comments, "My wound has fallen silent." Now, it is my soul that speaks. It may seem simple, but sometimes a single sentence is all it takes to confirm your own liberation. You didn't lose anyone. You found yourself again. It seems simple when you hear it, but this phrase carries within it a silent revolution, because until recently, you believed you were losing everything. The people, the connections, the loves, the opportunities to be accepted, to be seen, to be chosen. You believed the price of your transformation was separation, and in a way it was. But what you didn't know is that, behind what seemed like loss, lay the greatest reunion your soul could experience, the reunion with itself. Rumi said, "Let go of what doesn't let you grow. The soul knows where to go." And her soul, tired of begging for belonging, began to walk toward a place where she no longer needed to shrink to fit in, a place where she didn't have to dim her own light to avoid disturbing others, where she didn't demand unconditional sweetness in exchange for emotional crumbs, where she could finally rest without fear. This place is you. Spiritual awakening, contrary to what many people think, doesn't come with immediate clarity. It arrives as an internal shock, a dense silence, a frightening feeling of emptiness, because the first thing awakened consciousness destroys are illusions. And illusions, however painful, have always been your emotional cushion. That promise that someone would come, that everything would make sense, that all you had to do was love enough to be loved in return. But when that mattress disappears, the ground appears, and it's on the ground that you begin to build who you are firmly, with roots, with lucidity. You stop being the one who runs and become the one who walks. Stop being the one who waits and become the one who chooses. It stops being the one that explains itself and becomes the one that silences. The woman who no longer needs anyone is not the woman who rejects love. It is the woman who has stopped rejecting herself. She didn't build walls. She built a home. And now, everything that approaches her needs to be able to enter with respect, with presence, with reciprocity. This shift in consciousness doesn't happen with applause. It happens in the dark. It happens after many late nights when you felt broken, but chose not to betray yourself. It happens after interrupted conversations, broken bonds, lost glances. It happens in the silence of decisions no one sees, but which the soul recognizes as liberation. And in this process, you surprise yourself, because you begin to realize that you no longer miss what used to consume you, because you start to value the simple, the light, what doesn't charge you to exist, because you begin to hear your intuition clearly, and this voice, previously muffled by the fear of being alone, now becomes your guide, your north, your bridge to the sacred. You learn that you no longer need to chase after what vibrates far away from you, that what is for your soul finds ways, that true love does not require suffering as proof, that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of self. This new consciousness transforms everything. Transform the way you look at yourself. Transform the way you relate. Transforms the way you breathe. You stop putting pressure on yourself to be perfect, and you start to allow yourself to be true. You abandon the ideal of being loved by everyone, and begin to cultivate the love of those who recognize you, even if that someone at the moment is just you. The woman who once lost herself for fear of being alone now understands that being with someone isn't the solution. It's just a reflex. Because when you're whole within yourself, any relationship that comes your way needs to, at the very least, respect that wholeness. Otherwise, she won't enter. And that's not arrogance. That's awareness. You become your best company. Treat yourself with more tenderness. Forgive your falls. It welcomes you on days when the world seems too big. And remember, always, that you no longer need to mold yourself to fit anyone's love, because the love you need is already vibrating within you. And when this love manifests, when you recognize the power of being your own home, external demands disappear. The need to prove you're good enough disappears. The urgency to be chosen dissolves, because you understand that the most important thing is not being chosen. It's up to you to choose, every day, with all the scars, with all the stories, with all the light and all the shadow it carries. The woman who doesn't need anyone is, for the first time, the one who has herself. She doesn't need to be admired. She needs to be respected. It doesn't need to be desired. She needs to be honored. She doesn't need promises. She needs presence. And until this presence manifests itself in another, It remains within oneself, and that is enough. If in some way this awareness is awakening within you now, if you feel that you are in this silent process of finding yourself again after losing everything that distracted you from yourself, leave it here in the comments. I found myself again in the silence of my own presence. Writing this is recognizing a sacred path that is emerging within you, and sometimes just one sentence is enough to remind your soul that it is finally returning home. If you've come this far, it's because something inside you recognized every word, every silence, every pain transformed into strength. It's because your soul heard, understood, connected, and that's why this channel is also your place. Sign up now and walk with me, because this journey of healing, of spiritual awakening, of rebirth as a woman who no longer needs anyone, is just beginning. And if you stayed this far, leave a like, but leave it not out of habit, but as a gesture of recognition for what you felt. And now, the next step is right around the corner. Watch the video that appears on the screen. It's a continuation of your own story, because when the soul awakens, it wants more.